Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Deborah Evans, LLG Chief Executive, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everyone.
Now then, the Christmas season might soon be upon us, ho, 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 but there is no let-up in the pace with which the government is moving to make significant changes in the sector. But there are also long-standing issues which might come back to bite the sector. Now, one of those is, drum roll please, PFI, Private Finance Initiatives. Dennis.
Indeed, they are, Deborah. And the story is this. Many London boroughs are not prepared for the expiry of PFI contracts and are hampered by a lack of resources in addressing this. And that conclusion has come from a report by law firm Devonshire's for the Future of London think tank and the construction consultancy Airy Miller. It found in many cases that boroughs lacked project management capacity and clear contract ownership. And this could lead to a major disruption in public services as, over the next decade, private finance initiative contracts will expire across at least 20 London boroughs, accounting for 3/4 of all PFI contracts in the whole capital. Nicola Mathers, Chief Executive of Future of London, said, "This is the first review of the implications of PFI contract expiry on London local authorities. And we talked to most of the boroughs affected, and it's clear that many feel underprepared and under-resourced. Some £6 billion worth of payments remain due from London boroughs to private sector operators for assets and services, including schools, housing, care facilities, and street lighting. And senior local government figures reported resourcing pressures, including increased costs of service delivery after government PFI credits stop, the lack of management capacity to lead expiry preparations, and that PFI reserves had not kept up with inflation to manage the expiry process effectively." Feedback from boroughs showed that PFI contract expiry will increase the financial strain on councils already dealing with unprecedented financial pressures. Once PFI contracts expire, the responsibility for maintaining the assets and services involved would initially fall to local authorities, unless, of course, they're transferred to third parties, such as schools or academies. Councils could therefore inherit unknown, problematic and expensive risks and liabilities if expiry and handback is not managed properly. The report recommended public bodies with PFI contracts should break down the process into business as usual, expiry, and post-expiry service delivery. They should explore potential extensions to align contract end dates with maintenance and procurement schedules. They should invest in project management capability and agree on asset condition at least 5 years before expiry in order to avoid costly disputes. Deborah.
Well, the Infrastructure and Projects Authority recommends that public authorities should start preparing 8 years in advance of expiry of PFI contracts and carry out health checks at the same time. Now, they also look at 3-year points examining detailed considerations around legal and financial options, which include best value. Now, the last numbers I was able to source, which was about 2021, I believe, said there were over 550 PFI contracts in England, which were due to expire in 20 years and 200 within 10 years. So now is the time to act if that applies to your authority. Now, in other news, the LGA has reported that the Mental Health Bill has received its second reading in the House of Lords, and it discusses reforms to mental health legislation. Now, key points included improving patient rights, addressing racial disparities in mental health care, and ensuring access to community-based support. Now, peers stressed the importance of safeguarding against inappropriate detentions and providing adequate resources for implementation. Now, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Patient Safety, Women's Health and Mental Health, Baroness Merron, highlighted steps to modernise care and align services with contemporary mental health needs. Now, it goes without saying that the LGA has explicitly supported reform of the Mental Health Act and has previously stated that the emphasis on treating people as individuals should be a fundamental principle. The LGA welcomed the intention of the Act to address the rising rates of detention and experiences of people from Black, Caribbean and African backgrounds, and stressed the importance of the Act, reflecting the needs of people with lived experience of mental health needs, and that it is essential that the new Act clearly recognises the local leadership role of councils and identifies the roles and responsibilities of councils in respect of both statutory and non-statutory mental health duties, working in partnership with the NHS and local voluntary and community services. Of course, the LGA points out that to revise mental health provision will require additional funding for councils and their partners, as the Act will have significant resource implications which will need to be fully funded on a long-term basis. Now, for many years, mental services funding has been reduced at all levels despite rising demand. So the Act really needs to reflect the operational needs and the resource pressures on local government, who will need to be resourced to support effective implementation. Now, Dennis, we've been covering the employment bill in our podcast pretty much every week, and today is no exception.
Indeed, Deborah, because the government is to push ahead with extending the limitation period for bringing employment claims. In an amendment to the Employment Rights Bill, Minister Justin Madders set out a reform which would increase the time limit for bringing proceedings from 3 months to 6. The extension had been expected as part of the government's employment law reforms, but was not included in the bill when it was introduced last month. And several lawyers have questioned why such a significant change was not part of the initial bill. The legislation is currently with a Public Bill Committee, which is scrutinising the proposals and will report to the House of Commons by the 21st of January. Witnesses gave evidence to the committee last week and were asked about the impact of a 6-month limit. Jolie Braley, founder of a campaign group representing women's issues in employment, told MPs that the current 3-month limit is letting down women who are suffering discrimination at work and stopping them taking action against employers. Braley went on, "We know certainly in cases of pregnancy and maternity discrimination that fewer than 1% of women who have that experience raise a tribunal claim. Part of what we do," she said, "part of what we need to do is to extend that time limit to raise a claim. It is currently 3 months," she said. "It needs to be at least 6 months so that women have the opportunity to recover from their experience before they start to go through that onerous, difficult process of raising a tribunal claim." The committee heard that any change would put extra pressure on a tribunal system that is already reporting delays of up to 2 years. Ben Wilmot, head of public policy with the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, said the tribunal system was already swamped, and there was likely to be an enormous increase in tribunal applications. Alex Hall-Chen, Principal Policy Advisor with the Institute of Directors, added, "There is a particular concern that these changes will be introduced before the tribunal system has been sufficiently reformed to be able to deal with the influx of cases that will come with them." Deborah.
Now, I can certainly see arguments on both sides of this, Dennis. 3 months is a very quick period of time to recover from what might have been a stressful situation, and then to seek legal advice and issue a claim. But on the other hand, employers need to know quite quickly whether a claim will be brought against them, and also the longer the period, the increased likelihood of existing staff having moved on, which can impact on the ability to put a defence together. It is, however, a very interesting point that you raise as to why it wasn't originally included in the bill. Now, something else of significant importance to the sector was the local government finance statement, which was made on the 28th of November. Now, Dennis and I are going to be having a chatty discussion about this in the vlog this week, but for now, I'm going to concentrate on the written ministerial statement made in Parliament by Jim McMahon, Minister for Local Government and Devolution. Now, on the 28th, Mr McMahon started strongly with highlighting that councillors, officers and frontline staff are due our respect and appreciation for the work they've done to keep services going through very difficult times. Hear, hear. He added that this government is under no illusion about the scale of the issues facing local government, adding, our fiscal inheritance means that there will be tough choices on all sides to get us back on the path to recovery, and it will take time. I think we all know that. On the matter of local government finance, he pledged to update the system, stating that the current funding system is fundamentally broken, wasting taxpayers' money and starving authorities of the funding needed to provide the services we all rely on. Mr McMahon pledged in his statement to, quote, reset the relationship with local government, working as equal partners to ensure that the sector delivers continuous improvement for its communities, operates at the highest standards of probity and provides value for money, all while giving the sector greater autonomy, certainty and flexibility. Referencing standards, he said, we will rebuild the system of accountability and oversight in local government, including an overhaul of local audit, scrutiny and standards, and will consult on strengthening the standards and conduct framework for local authorities in England. On the settlement, the Minister said, the autumn budget announced over £4 billion in additional funding for local government services, £1.3 billion of which will go through the settlement. Overall, the provisional settlement will ensure that local government receives a real terms increase in core spending power of around 3.2%. He also pledged to provide support for departments and other public sector employers for additional employer NI costs for those directly employed by local government. So, somewhat encouraging, but if you want to hear mine and Dennis's assessment on what the latest announcements on local government finance actually mean for councils, you're going to have to listen to the vlog. Dennis.
Thank you, Deborah. At this time of the year, perhaps as you might expect, I look for a seasonal story to round off with, and I didn't have to look very far. This story is really typical of how councils go the extra mile and bring some cheer to their communities despite tight budgets and financial pressures. An appeal to raise £56,000 to cover the cost of Christmas celebrations in the city of Peterborough has been achieved thanks to generous donations from businesses and organisations across Peterborough, and from councillors too. The City Council recently announced that it was still £22,000 short of its sponsorship target to cover the cost of the City Christmas Switch-On event and its Christmas tree and lights. Councillors agreed back in February that the cost of the celebrations would be covered by sponsorship as part of a number of decisions to deliver a balanced budget for the current financial year. And a number of businesses, organisations and individuals have now come forward and pledged the necessary sponsorship. In addition, many city councillors have agreed to contribute money from their Community Leadership Fund, a pot of money that they can use each year on projects which benefit the people of their wards. As a result, the Christmas light switch-on did in fact go ahead on Friday the 22nd of November. And Councillor Mohammed Jamil, Deputy Leader, said, it is fantastic news that we have met our sponsorship target and we can now get on with putting everything in place for the Christmas events to take place. A big thank you, he said, to everyone and every person and organisation that has pledged to support these events. Collectively, they have saved Christmas in Peterborough and ensured that thousands of residents and visitors from further afield can enjoy the switch-on event and spending time in the city centre over the Christmas and New Year period. The switch-on event included live music and entertainment on stage, culminating with the switching on of the lights on the Christmas tree and across the city centre. And also taking place will be Peterborough Cathedral's Christmas market. So thank you, Peterborough, and thank you to all councils across the country who make Christmas happen in their local communities. Can you imagine what it would be like if events like this simply never took place anymore? It's a thought, Deborah, that makes me shiver.
Indeed, Dennis, there is something lovely about a local Christmas light switch on to get you in a festive mood, and it can give the local high street a real boost. But it's not the only thing, as the government last week gave councils new powers to tackle empty shops on their high streets. Under the provisions, local authorities will be able to auction off leases for commercial properties that have been empty for long periods, helping bring businesses back to the high street and drive growth across the country. High street rental auctions will create a right to rent for businesses and community groups, giving them access to city, town and village centre sites, which it is hoped will stop landlords sitting on empty shops where they lay empty for more than 365 days in a 24-month period. If they do, councils can auction the property off for a 1 to 5 year lease. Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds said about the new powers, empty shop premises that gather dust just aren't doing any good to high streets, jobs and the economy. This is why we've said we'll lift the shutters, and today we're delivering on that promise. Now, Darlington and Mansfield will be early adopters of the new powers, whilst Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole will join the early adopters programme in an advisory role as critical friends, with additional local authorities invited to join at a later stage. Now, these provisions were originally introduced by the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023, but the High Street rental auctions powers came into force after legislation was laid in November. A council must engage with a landlord before moving to a property to auction. There is a two-stage notification procedure and a period of grace for a landlord to get a tenant before moving to auction, and a council inviting bids from potential businesses. However, any lease granted will be outside the security of tenure provisions of the Landlord and Tenant Act 1954. Now, legal advisors have not surprisingly thrown up a few challenges with the scheme. There's no guidance at present as to how a rental should be assessed for price, because it's not just about income, it's about improvements to the property and type of business use. These are all factors, so how should that be assessed? It's also important because amounts charged could be used as comparable evidence for statutory lease renewals and rental reviews. There are also questions around whether councils can actually afford the time and resources to take advantage of these provisions. That was a major stumbling block for some authorities under empty dwelling management orders. Between 2006 and 2018, a total of just 229 applications were made under the Housing Act 2004. But let's hope this process is easier for the sector. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on that and the items discussed today, and many, many more besides, by going to bulletin number 46, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Bye now.
Thank you for listening and have a good week.